We're going to ask about defense and the Indo-Pacific with our guest, David Camroux of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
My pleasure.
First off, France, again, looking for daylight, though, between China and the United States at this time. We're speaking on the day after tariffs against the EU were paused by Donald Trump. They're not paused when it comes to Vietnam, though.
No, I mean, they're the highest after Cambodia, 46% are being imposed. I think what one needs to understand is that we have a Donald Trump, we have a United States, which is somehow stuck, at least mentally, in the 19th century. Donald Trump thinks in terms of spheres of influence, and that Europe should worry about Europe, China should be the Asia Pacific, and after that, the United States, well, that's the Pacific, the Indo-Pacific. And so the fact that President Macron is there giving this European perspective that, we are the third party, we are reliable, that's the key word, we are reliable. And that's in contrast with the United States of Donald Trump, which is unreliable as a partner. And also insist on multilateralism and on minilateralism and on the rules-based order. That goes down very well indeed in Southeast Asia, because what the countries of Southeast Asia want is not to have to choose between China and the United States. And the US in particular is pushing them to make that choice. And they do not want to make that choice between their largest trading partner and, for some at least, their security guarantor.
And the French, what kind of view towards them? Just another trading partner? Is the past all forgotten? Because we've been looking at those images at the memorial there for victims of Vietnam's war for independence. France's colonial past, all that, is it all in the past in the eyes of Vietnamese?
No, it's not all in the past. One of the reasons being the importance of the Vietnamese diaspora in France, throughout Europe. The Czech Republic has the largest Vietnamese diaspora in the world in relation to its population. And that diaspora in Europe and the United States plays a very important role, both in trade questions, but also in making sure that Vietnam remains on the radar screen. And that France continues to be engaged.
And that diaspora, by the way, David Camroux, it's here in France, at least, we found, doing reporting for the 50th anniversary of Saigon becoming the South Vietnamese quitting Saigon, we found that diaspora was split. Some people who still want to call it Saigon, others who don't. For some, it's Liberation Day. For some, it's the fall of Saigon. That diaspora, when you say they keep Vietnam on the radar, how do they do it?
Well, there's increasing convergence, especially amongst the younger generation, for whom the splits of the past. Remember that in Vietnam itself, 80% of the population has been born, 70% since 1975, since reunification. And so what I find, for example, with my students of the Vietnamese diaspora, that they're all sort of Vietnamese, or at least they revel in their Vietnamese ancestry, and that's part of their identity. And so, both in the North and South, people from the North and South both share the same adversary, which remains historically China. So, in the situation where Vietnam is seeking support in its constantly conflictual relationship with China. It's also a very positive trade relationship, but it's not an easy relationship. France is, and Europe in general, is important.
And there's, on this three-nation trip, Emmanuel Macron, forgive me, will be going to Singapore for that defense conference. Tell us a bit about how France sees itself in relation to this defense question, particularly when he wasn't really talking so much in his speech about China, more about the United States.
Yes, once again, France and Europe in general is that third party. France is the only resident European power in the Indo-Pacific, and France in particular plays a very strong role in the South Pacific. It's above the equator where things become more complicated. And so in some ways, the Americans don't want Europe to be there, at least in strategic terms, or even in economic terms, in the Pacific. It's very interesting that about a week ago, the Americans criticized the British for sending a fleet with the aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth around the Indo-Pacific, and basically the Americans said, "Well, look, worry about Europe. You know, this is our area." So it is becoming sort of more difficult for France in particular, but Europe in general, to talk about their Indo-Pacific commitment. But I think once again, it's in the provision of military equipment, so you're not dependent on the United States. It's in supporting, multilateral solutions, multilateral solutions which respect the international order, the rule of law, that there's a convergence of interest. And certainly that's something that he will insist upon, I think, in his keynote speech in the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is the foremost defense forum in Asia.
And you saw that it's a state visit in Vietnam. There is the First Lady who's there, and we talked earlier about Slapgate, as it's being called, that moment. Bringing Brigitte Macron for this kind of visit, is it important?
Yes, it is, because we are in societies who put a great deal of value on family. And so, that gives an extra dimension that there is that the Brigitte Macron is present. It's unfortunate that in the social media, we're only going to talk about that, and we're not going to talk about the substantive things that have occurred in this visit and will occur, particularly in Indonesia and also later in Singapore.
David Camroux, many thanks for being with us here on France 24.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.